Welcome back, everyone. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
The ballroom entrance of the base was already crowded when I arrived. You could hear the music from inside, soft jazz, the kind people pretend to listen to while they calculate who matters in the room. Officers in dress uniforms stood in small circles under the chandelier light. Their spouses wore gowns that probably cost more than a junior lieutenant's yearly rent. It was the military annual gala, the most expensive night of the year to pretend everyone in this building respected honor. I walked up the wide stone steps wearing a plain black dress. No label, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the basics. The kind of dress that disappears in a room where people measure status by the shine of their watch, which was exactly the point. 2 officers stood at the entrance with tablets checking names. Behind them, the grand doors to the ballroom were open, spilling warm light into the marble lobby. And standing right beside them like she owned the building was my sister, Jessica. She wore a silver evening gown that looked like it had been engineered by NASA. Every step she took made the fabric catch the light. Her hair was styled in a perfect wave that probably required 3 stylists and a can of industrial hairspray. Next to her stood her husband, Major Liam Cross. Dress uniform, perfect posture, chest full of medals. He looked exactly like the kind of officer the military loved to put on recruitment posters. Jessica spotted me the moment I stepped onto the marble floor. Her smile froze, then slowly turned into something else. "Oh my God," she said loudly, not even trying to hide the disgust. "Sarah." Several heads turned. Jessica stepped forward and looked me up and down like she had just found a cockroach in a champagne glass. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply kept walking toward the entrance. That's when she turned to the officer checking invitations. The usher looked young, probably a lieutenant assigned to handle guest check-in. Jessica tilted her head toward me and spoke in a voice that carried just enough to entertain the people nearby. "You don't need to check her name." The officer blinked. Jessica continued smiling sweetly. "She's just a janitor from one of the storage buildings." A couple nearby chuckled. Jessica crossed her arms. She probably wandered in looking for cleaning supplies. Then she leaned closer to the officer and lowered her voice just enough to sound conspiratorial. "You should escort her out before the general arrives." The officer looked at me, then at Jessica, then back at me again. You could see the hesitation on his face. He didn't know who I was, but he definitely knew who Jessica and Liam were. Everyone on the base knew them, the perfect military couple, the rising star officer and the glamorous wife who posted charity photos on Instagram. Meanwhile, I was standing there in a simple black dress with no badge and no introduction. From the outside, the decision looked pretty easy. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't raise my voice. Instead, my eyes drifted slightly to the left, right to Liam's wrist. The sleeve of his dress uniform had slid back just enough. And there it was, an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. $80,000. Even from across the marble floor, the brushed steel caught the light. Beautiful watch. Wrong wrist. A major's salary doesn't buy an $80,000 watch. Not legally. My gaze lingered for half a second. Long enough. Then I looked back at the usher. The young officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask." I took one quiet step backward. Not out of fear, just to make his job easier. The room relaxed instantly. Jessica smiled wider. "See, problem solved." She gave Liam a smug little look like she had just handled a minor inconvenience before the real guests arrived. Liam barely glanced at me. To him, I was background noise. He adjusted the cuff of his uniform, exposing the watch again for a moment before sliding it back under the sleeve. That watch had been bothering me for 3 weeks. Because numbers don't lie. And neither do transaction records. The usher stepped forward again. "Ma'am, if you'll come with me." Before he could finish the sentence, my finger tapped once against the secure phone inside my coat pocket. Just one light tap. The kind that looks like someone checking a notification. No one around us noticed. Except me. Jessica folded her arms and leaned slightly toward the officer. "You see," she said, "I told you." Then she looked directly at me. "You should have just stayed home, Sarah." Her voice dropped into that familiar tone she had used since we were teenagers. The one that always carried the same message. "You don't belong here." Behind her, the ballroom doors opened wider as another group of officers entered. Champagne glasses clinked somewhere inside. The gala was about to begin. Jessica stepped closer to the entrance, reclaiming her position as if she had just defended the gate of a castle. I watched her for a moment. Then I looked at Liam again, this time not at his face, not at his medals, just at the watch. Jessica smirked, convinced she had just locked me outside the room where power lived. What she didn't realize was that my eyes had already locked onto the exact piece of evidence that was going to send her husband to federal prison. My finger was still resting on the phone in my pocket when the memory from the night before pushed its way back into my head. 24 hours earlier, I had been standing in one of the most secure rooms in the Pentagon. The SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. No windows, no signal, no outside devices. Just thick steel doors, soundproof walls, and rows of government servers humming like quiet engines. People like to imagine intelligence work as something dramatic, agents running across rooftops, or whispering into hidden microphones. Most of the time, it's spreadsheets, endless numbers. Cold fluorescent lights filled the room. The blue glow from 3 large monitors painted the metal desk in front of me. I stood there with my arms folded, staring at a shipment log. $2.4 million. That was the number that had brought me into this room. $2.4 million in medical supplies and military equipment that had quietly vanished from a logistics chain connected to the base hosting tonight's gala. Not lost, not miscounted, redirected. The first thing investigators learn is simple. Numbers don't lie. People do. I leaned closer to the screen and scrolled through the shipment records again. Medical trauma kits, night vision components, portable field ventilators. Every item had been signed out properly, approved, stamped, cleared. The signature authorizing the transfers appeared again and again at the bottom of the screen. Major Liam Cross. I didn't react. Surprises are for amateurs. By the time I walked into that SCIF, I already suspected his name would be there. What interested me was the pattern. Because corruption in the military rarely works alone. One person moves the cargo. Another person moves the money. I opened the financial trace window on the second monitor. 3 offshore transfers appeared on the screen. The funds moved in neat increments through a logistics contractor account. From there, they disappeared into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. Classic structure. Simple, clean, illegal. The company name was short and forgettable. Blue Harbor Holdings. No employees, no office. Just a mailbox address on a tropical island. I tapped the keyboard and pulled up the ownership file. For a second, the screen stayed blank. Then the registered director appeared. Jessica Lane Cross, my sister. I exhaled slowly. There are moments in investigations when you feel something shift inside you. Not shock, not anger, just confirmation. Because deep down, you already knew the truth. I leaned back against the metal table behind me and looked at the screen again. Liam handled the military authorization. Jessica handled the laundering. A married couple running a $2.4 million black market pipeline. Honestly, I almost admired the efficiency. Almost. The door behind me opened with a heavy click. My partner on the task force stepped inside. Agent Miller. He was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and the expression of someone who had been staring at spreadsheets too long. He set one of the cups beside my keyboard. "Tell me you found something," he said. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I rotated the monitor slightly so he could see the ownership record. Miller read the name, then looked at me. "Your sister, yep." He rubbed his forehead. "Please tell me she married into this mess and didn't start it." I pointed at the third screen. "Follow the money." He leaned forward and scanned the transfer records. "Jesus," he muttered. Then he pointed at one specific transaction. "Wait, what's this one?" I already knew which line he meant. The transfer happened that morning, 9 hours earlier. $15,000, pulled directly from the offshore account. I opened the linked purchase record. A luxury boutique in Georgetown. Item description: custom evening gown. Miller stared at the screen. Address: I reached into my pocket and opened Instagram on my phone. Jessica's latest post had been uploaded 2 hours earlier. She was standing in front of a mirror smiling like she had just conquered the world. The caption read, "Military Gala Ready." The gown sparkled under the lights. Silver, elegant. Price tag $15,000. I placed the phone next to the transaction record. Miller let out a slow whistle. She paid for that dress with stolen military funds. "Not just military funds," I said. I opened another file. The origin of the account appeared on screen. Veterans Disability Support Allocation. Miller's expression hardened immediately. "That's the Wounded Soldier Fund." "Exactly. Money meant for amputees and injured veterans." recycled into a Cayman account, then turned into designer fashion, for a gala celebrating military honor. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The server fans hummed softly behind us. Finally, Miller leaned back. "So what's the move?" I stared at the screen again. Every investigation has a moment where the pieces stop being separate, where the pattern becomes undeniable. Tonight's gala. Major Liam Cross receiving a commendation. Hundreds of senior officers attending. My sister parading around in a $15,000 dress paid for by injured soldiers. Perfect timing, public setting, maximum accountability. I reached forward and opened the authorization panel on the final monitor. One command window appeared. Security clearance suspension request. All I had to do was enter the code. Miller watched quietly. "You planning to pull the trigger tonight?" I looked at the clock in the corner of the screen. 24 hours until the gala. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. Cold move, efficient move. He picked up his coffee again. "You know this is going to destroy your family." I thought about Jessica, about Liam, about the watch I had seen on his wrist the week before. $80,000. Paid for by stolen equipment. Then I looked again at the $15,000 dress on my phone screen. My sister liked to show off. That had always been her weakness. She needed people to see the luxury, to admire it, to envy it. And to have that luxury, she needed her husband's security access. I rested my finger lightly on the keyboard. My sister was using the military's blood money to buy glamour. But to get that glamour, she needed Liam's clearance. And tonight my finger was already resting on the suspension button. My finger slid away from the phone in my pocket as the ballroom doors opened again behind Jessica. More guests stepped out into the lobby. Laughter drifted from inside. The gala was warming up. Jessica had already turned her attention back to the important people arriving. To her, the situation had been handled. Problem removed. I stayed near the edge of the marble entrance just outside the main doors. From there, I could still see the line of officers arriving, the ushers checking names, and Liam shaking hands like he was already rehearsing his award speech. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. A voice that carried the tone of someone who had spent 40 years believing he was the smartest person in every room. "Sarah," I turned slightly. My father, Robert, was walking toward me from inside the ballroom. His tuxedo looked expensive, though I knew exactly who had paid for it. His expression changed the moment he saw me standing there. Not surprise, not curiosity, just irritation. He stopped a few feet away and glanced quickly toward the entrance, making sure no one important was close enough to hear. Then he leaned toward me. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. Robert had always had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions. He already believed he knew the answer. His eyes moved over my dress, my shoes, my empty hands. No jewelry, no designer purse. His mouth tightened slightly. "You can't seriously think you belong at this event." Inside the ballroom, someone laughed loudly. Jessica's voice floated out over the music. Robert lowered his voice even more. "Liam is about to receive a commendation tonight." He gestured vaguely toward the ballroom. "There are generals in there, senators, donors." Then he looked back at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and superiority. "And you show up dressed like that." I watched him calmly. My father had always measured success in the simplest possible way: money, titles, recognition, and in his mind, my sister had married perfectly. Jessica had the lifestyle. Liam had the uniform. That combination was everything Robert respected. Me, I had never bothered explaining my career to him, mostly because he had never bothered asking. Robert sighed and rubbed his temple like I was giving him a headache. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "You don't have money," he held up one finger. "You don't have status." Second finger. "And you certainly don't have the kind of reputation that belongs in a room full of senior officers." Then he pointed toward the exit behind me. "So don't embarrass this family tonight." The words were delivered like an order, not a request. I stayed quiet. Robert mistook that silence for agreement. He leaned closer. "And if you somehow manage to ruin Liam's night," he paused for effect, "I will remove your name from my will." There it was, the great weapon of every dramatic parent. The inheritance threat. I almost smiled. Robert stepped back, clearly satisfied with the impact of his speech. He straightened his jacket and glanced toward the ballroom doors again, making sure nobody had witnessed the conversation. What he didn't realize was that the real audience wasn't standing in this lobby. It was watching the story unfold. Because there was something about Robert's financial confidence that most people didn't know. 4 years ago, my parents almost lost their house. Mortgage problems, missed payments, medical bills. The bank had started sending letters. The kind of letters that include words like foreclosure. Jessica had posted sympathy messages online. Liam had told relatives he was helping out. And Robert had proudly repeated that story at every family gathering. My son-in-law takes care of us. It sounded impressive, responsible, generous. But the truth was much quieter. Every month for the last 4 years, a payment had left my bank account. $3,500. Automatic transfer. Mortgage account number ending in 2147. My parents never asked where the money came from. They didn't need to. They had already decided who the hero was. Robert crossed his arms now and studied my face. Well, I reached slowly into my coat pocket. For a moment, his expression softened slightly. Maybe he thought I was about to apologize. Instead, I pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app. The mortgage account appeared instantly. Automatic payment scheduled. $3,500. Due in 12 days. Robert frowned. What are you doing? I looked up and met his eyes. For the first time in years, I held his gaze long enough that he shifted slightly. Then I tapped the screen. Cancel auto payment. The confirmation window appeared. I pressed confirm. The phone made a small sound, a quiet electronic beep. Robert stared at me. What was that? I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Then I answered him calmly. Don't worry, Dad. He waited. You'll never have to worry about me interfering with your bills again. For a moment, he didn't understand. Then his face twisted into something close to anger. Oh, please, he said. You're being dramatic. He waved a hand dismissively. You never paid for anything in that house. His voice dropped into the same tone he used whenever he talked about my career. People like you don't have that kind of money. Inside the ballroom, someone started clapping, probably the start of another speech. Robert glanced toward the sound, then he looked back at me with a confident smirk. I meant what I said, Sarah. He adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo. If you cause trouble tonight, you're out of the will. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Robert took my silence as surrender. He turned around already satisfied that he had reasserted control over the disappointing daughter. As he walked back toward the ballroom doors, his shoulders looked relaxed again. Victorious, certain, completely unaware. Because the soft little beep from my phone a moment earlier had just officially turned him into a homeless man next month. I watched my father disappear back into the ballroom, then I turned toward the entrance again. The ushers were still busy checking names. Officers in dress uniforms stepped forward one by one, handing over invitations and smiling like tonight was the highlight of their careers. Jessica had moved a few feet away from the door, now greeting guests and collecting compliments about her dress. The silver fabric was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Every time the light hit it, people noticed. Jessica loved attention the way some people love oxygen. I waited until the line shifted and the ushers were focused on a group of colonels arriving together. Then I walked past the security tablet without saying a word. The young lieutenant didn't even look up. From the outside, it probably looked like I had already been cleared. Inside the ballroom, the air was warmer. Soft lighting spread across the ceiling, reflecting off crystal chandeliers. Round tables filled the center of the room, each covered with white linen and decorated with military insignia. At the far end stood a small stage with a podium and a large projection screen. That screen would later be used to celebrate Major Liam Cross. But for now, the room was still in the social phase of the evening. People were drinking, laughing, trading stories that all sounded slightly exaggerated. A jazz band played quietly in the corner while servers moved between the tables with trays of champagne. I walked along the wall until I reached the VIP bar. It was positioned slightly away from the main crowd, tucked behind a tall decorative column. Perfect place to stand without being noticed. The bartender glanced at me. What can I get you? Water, I said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. At a military gala, asking for water at the bar usually meant one of two things. Either you were the designated driver, or you were working. He handed me a tall glass bottle and a clean glass. I poured the water slowly and leaned one elbow on the bar. From that angle, I could see Liam perfectly. He was standing in the center of a small group of officers near the opposite side of the room. Jessica stood beside him, smiling like a professional public relations manager. Liam had already loosened up. One hand rested casually in his pocket, while the other held a champagne glass. He was telling a story, probably something heroic. The officers around him laughed. A server walked past with a tray of champagne bottles. Liam raised his hand and stopped him. "Leave those," he said. The server placed 3 expensive bottles on the table. Jessica's smile widened. Liam turned to the bartender across the room and lifted his voice slightly. "Let's celebrate a little early tonight." The group laughed again. He pulled a sleek black credit card from his pocket and handed it to the bartender. Black metal, heavy, the kind of card designed to impress people before it even touches the machine. I watched quietly while I sipped my water. The bartender slid the card through the payment terminal. The small screen lit up. Then the machine made a short sound. Beep! A red light flashed. The bartender frowned. "Let me try that again, sir." He ran the card a second time. The same red light blinked. This time the beep was louder. A couple of the officers exchanged confused looks. Liam gave a small laugh. Probably just the signal. The bartender tried the chip reader. Another red light. Another beep. Now the room around the table had grown quieter. Jessica's smile tightened slightly. "Is something wrong?" she asked. The bartender looked uncomfortable. "It says the transaction was declined." Liam straightened. "That's impossible." He took the card back and examined it like the machine might have damaged it. Then he pulled out his phone. "Excuse me," he muttered. He stepped a few feet away from the table and dialed a number. I could see his posture change while the call connected, confidence fading, annoyance replacing it. "Yeah," he said into the phone. "This is Major Liam Cross. My card is being declined." He listened. His expression shifted slightly. "No, that can't be right." More silence. Then the blood slowly drained from his face. "What do you mean?" Frozen Jessica was staring at him now. The officers around the table pretended not to listen, which meant they were listening very carefully. Liam turned slightly away from them. "I need you to explain that again." The voice on the other end must have repeated the explanation, because Liam stopped speaking. Completely, finally he said one quiet sentence. "According to who?" Another pause. Then the answer came. The words must have been simple, but they hit him like a punch. Federal Task Force. Liam lowered the phone slowly. Jessica stepped toward him. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. His eyes had moved across the room, straight to the VIP bar, straight to me. I was standing exactly where I had been the entire time, leaning casually against the counter, holding a glass of water. When our eyes met, I lifted the glass slightly in a small silent toast. Then I slowly mouthed a number. Not a random number. The exact Cayman account number his shell company used to store the stolen money. I watched the recognition hit him in real time. First confusion, then realization, then pure terror. His face lost every trace of color. Jessica followed his gaze. She saw me standing at the bar, but she didn't understand the moment. To her, I was still just the embarrassing sister who had wandered into the wrong room. Liam knew better. His hand began to tremble slightly. The phone slipped a little in his grip before he tightened his fingers around it again. But pride is a powerful drug, especially for men who have spent their lives being admired. Liam straightened his shoulders. He forced a smile. Then he walked back to the table like nothing had happened. "System glitch," he said casually. "Probably a temporary freeze." Jessica relaxed instantly. "Oh, thank God." The officers laughed again. The moment of tension dissolved. Someone opened one of the champagne bottles anyway. Glasses were poured. To everyone else in the room, the problem had already disappeared. But from across the ballroom, I could see Liam's hand still shaking slightly as he lifted his drink. He believed this was a temporary error, a technical mistake, something that would fix itself in a few minutes. What he didn't realize was that an invisible kill network had already spread across the entire room. I set the glass of water back on the bar as the music slowly faded. The soft jazz band stopped playing mid-song. Lights across the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a spotlight turned toward the stage at the far end of the room. That was the signal. The social part of the evening was over. The official ceremony was beginning. People moved toward their tables, chairs scraped quietly across the floor, conversations lowered into polite murmurs. A senior officer stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone once. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling toward the crowd, "thank you for attending tonight's military annual gala." Polite applause spread across the room. I stayed where I was at the VIP bar. From that corner, I could see almost everything, the stage, the main tables, and the entrance doors at the back of the ballroom. Perfect view. The officer continued speaking. We gathered tonight not only to celebrate our service members, but to honor the families who support them. More applause. He glanced down at the program card in his hand. And before we present tonight's commendations, we've invited someone very special to say a few words about one of our honorees. He smiled again. The wife of Major Liam Cross. Jessica stood up immediately. She had been waiting for that moment all evening. Her silver gown shimmered as she walked toward the stage like a celebrity heading to a red carpet. The spotlight followed her. Jessica climbed the small set of steps and reached the podium. She adjusted the microphone slightly and smiled out across the ballroom. Hundreds of officers and guests looked up at her. She knew exactly how to work a room. "Good evening," she began. Her voice came out warm and confident. "It's truly an honor to stand here tonight among so many people who dedicate their lives to serving this country." Several people nodded approvingly. Jessica placed one hand lightly on the podium. "My husband Liam has always believed that service means more than wearing a uniform." She turned slightly toward Liam's table. "It means sacrifice, discipline, leadership." Liam smiled modestly while the table around him clapped. Jessica continued, "And as his wife, I've had the privilege of watching that dedication up close every single day." Her tone carried the practiced emotion of someone who had rehearsed this speech in a mirror. "Our family has always believed in building something meaningful, something lasting." She paused for dramatic effect. "Our father taught us that success isn't an accident. It's the result of vision, courage, and hard work." Robert was sitting near the front of the room. He looked very pleased with himself. Jessica leaned closer to the microphone. "In every family," she said slowly, "there are people who build great things." Another pause. "And there are people who simply clean up after others." A few guests chuckled softly. Jessica's eyes moved across the ballroom. Then she deliberately pointed the microphone toward the corner where I was standing. "And in my family," she added with a small smile, "some of us build empires." She tilted her head slightly. "And some of us, well," her gaze locked directly onto me. "Just take out the trash." The laughter was polite. Not cruel, but still laughter. The kind of laughter people use when they want to stay on the good side of the person holding the microphone. From across the ballroom, Jessica watched me carefully. She expected a reaction. Embarrassment, anger, anything. Instead, I calmly picked up my glass of water again and took another small sip. The room slowly quieted. Jessica turned back toward the microphone, satisfied. "Anyway," she continued brightly, "tonight isn't about family jokes. It's about honoring the incredible contributions of my husband." More applause followed. While the crowd clapped, I lifted my hand and lightly touched the side of my hair. Hidden just behind my ear was a tiny communication earpiece, almost invisible, the kind used by federal field teams when subtle coordination matters. I pressed my finger gently against it. Then I spoke quietly. "Lock the target." A voice responded almost instantly. "Target locked." I kept my gaze on the stage. "Stand by, copy." Across the ballroom, Jessica was finishing the final lines of her speech. "And tonight," she said proudly, "we celebrate the kind of leadership that keeps our nation strong." Applause filled the room again. Jessica smiled widely. Then something changed. A sudden noise echoed through the ballroom, not loud, but sharp. The sound of the large double doors at the back of the room opening quickly. Every head turned. The doors swung wide, and then the room fell completely silent. 4 military police officers stepped through first. They moved with quiet precision, taking positions near the entrance. Behind them walked a tall man in a decorated dress uniform. 4 stars shone on his shoulders. General Thomas Vance, the commanding officer of the entire regional command. The most powerful man on this base. 2 security officers followed a step behind him. No one spoke. Everyone stood up automatically. Chairs scraped across the floor as officers snapped into attention. Even the band members straightened up. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. General Vance didn't smile. He walked forward slowly across the marble floor, his polished shoes echoing with each step. Every pair of eyes followed him. At the podium, Jessica froze for half a second. Then excitement exploded across her face. She quickly stepped away from the microphone and hurried down the stage steps. Her hand smoothed the front of her silver dress as she moved through the crowd toward the general. Liam stood up from his table. Robert leaned forward in his chair. Jessica reached the open space in front of General Vance and lifted her hand eagerly. "General Vance," she said brightly. "I'm Jessica Cross, Major Cross's wife. It's such an honor." She extended her hand confidently, ready to receive the moment she believed belonged to her husband. Ready to stand in the glow of military recognition. Because Jessica believed the general had arrived to celebrate Liam. Jessica believed the spotlight had come for her family. Jessica was wrong. Jessica's hand was already extended when General Thomas Vance stepped into the center of the ballroom. Her smile looked flawless. The kind of smile people practice in mirrors, before charity events, and photo opportunities. "General Vance," she said brightly, stepping directly into his path. "I'm Jessica Cross, Major Cross's wife. It's such an honor." Her hand remained in the air, waiting for the polite handshake that usually follows introductions like that. It never came. General Vance didn't even slow down. He walked straight past her. Not with hostility, not with anger, just complete indifference. The kind of indifference powerful people use when something in front of them doesn't matter enough to acknowledge. Jessica's hand stayed frozen in the air for a full second. Then, too, the smile on her face began to crack. Behind her, Liam stepped forward quickly. "General, sir," he said, standing straighter. "Major Liam Cross." Still nothing. The general didn't look at him, didn't nod, didn't even shift his gaze. His polished shoes struck the marble floor with steady, deliberate steps. Each step echoed through the silent ballroom. Everyone in the room felt the tension. This wasn't normal protocol. When a 4-star general entered a ceremony honoring an officer, there were handshakes, congratulations, acknowledgements. Instead, General Vance walked through the crowd like Jessica and Liam were invisible. Jessica slowly lowered her hand. Confusion flickered across her face. Robert stood near the front table watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort. He leaned slightly toward Evelyn. "Why isn't he stopping?" he whispered. Evelyn didn't answer. Across the room, guests shifted quietly in their seats. Some people glanced at Liam. Others watched the general carefully. Because something was clearly happening. Something unexpected. General Vance continued walking across the ballroom, not toward the stage, not toward the honored tables, toward the far corner of the room, the darkest corner, the VIP bar, where I was standing. For a moment, nobody seemed to understand what they were seeing. Jessica turned slowly, following the direction of the general's path. Her eyes traveled across the room. Then they landed on me, the woman in the simple black dress standing quietly near the bar. Jessica blinked, then frowned. Liam followed her gaze. The moment his eyes met mine again, I saw the color drain from his face a second time. Because he already understood something the rest of the room hadn't figured out yet. General Vance wasn't wandering through the ballroom. He was walking toward a destination. Me. The general's steps slowed as he approached the bar. The entire ballroom had fallen silent now. Even the band had stopped breathing. Behind him, his security officers paused several feet away. The general took the final 2 steps. Then he stopped directly in front of me. From the outside, the contrast must have looked ridiculous. A 4-star general in a decorated uniform, standing face to face with a woman holding a glass of water. I placed the glass back on the bar. General Vance looked directly at me. His expression didn't change. Then he did something that made the entire room freeze. He brought his heels together sharply. Clack! The sound of polished military shoes striking marble echoed across the ballroom. The general stood at full attention. Perfect posture, eyes forward, complete military formality. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jessica stared at the scene like her brain had stopped working. Liam's mouth opened slightly. Robert looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. Because everyone in that room understood what they were witnessing. A 4-star general does not stand at attention for random civilians, especially not in the middle of a ceremony. General Vance spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Good evening." His tone carried across the silent ballroom. I gave a small nod. "Good evening, General." Behind him, the room erupted into whispers. Officers exchanged confused looks. Some of them were already beginning to realize something important. This wasn't an introduction. This was recognition. Jessica stepped forward slightly, clearly trying to understand what was happening. "General," she said. Cautiously. Her voice sounded smaller now. General Vance didn't look back at her. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Liam's breathing had become visibly uneven, because he had seen the task force authorization earlier that day. He knew exactly who had the authority to freeze his accounts. And now the most powerful officer on the base was standing at attention in front of that same person. The silence in the ballroom grew heavier. Robert suddenly pushed back his chair and stood up. "What is going on?" he muttered under his breath. No one answered him, because the answer was standing directly in front of me. General Vance maintained his posture. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "Everything is in position. Only someone standing close enough to hear would understand what he meant." I gave a small nod. Across the room, Jessica's eyes moved back and forth between us. Her expression was shifting from confusion into something closer to fear, because the moment she had been waiting for all evening was happening. But not the way she expected. The general wasn't here to congratulate Liam. He wasn't here to celebrate the Cross family. He had walked past them without even slowing down. And now he was standing at attention in front of the one person Jessica had spent the entire evening humiliating. My parents were staring at the scene with open mouths. Jessica stood frozen. But the thing that truly made them stop breathing wasn't the general standing in front of me. It was what he did next. General Vance was still standing at attention in front of me. The entire ballroom had gone silent. Hundreds of officers, command staff, civilian guests. No one moved. No one spoke. You could almost hear people thinking. Because whatever was about to happen next clearly wasn't part of the program printed on the gala menu. I watched the general calmly. Then he moved. Slowly and with deliberate precision, General Thomas Vance relaxed from his rigid stance. He took one small step forward. For a brief moment, the entire room leaned closer without realizing it. Jessica was staring at us from across the ballroom, her face frozen between confusion and disbelief. Liam hadn't taken his eyes off me. His expression now carried something new. Fear, not suspicion, not worry, fear. General Vance raised his hand slightly. Not toward my shoulder, not toward a handshake. He reached for my right hand. The movement was respectful, controlled, almost ceremonial. I allowed it. He gently lifted my hand from my side. And then in front of every single person in that ballroom, the 4-star general lowered his head and placed a brief formal kiss on the back of my hand. The gesture lasted less than a second, but the effect was explosive. Gasps spread through the room like a shockwave. Jessica's glass slipped from her fingers. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sharp crack. Red wine splashed across the silver fabric of her dress. No one even looked down, because every pair of eyes in that ballroom was now locked onto me. General Vance straightened again, his voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Director Sarah." The words echoed across the ballroom. He spoke clearly enough that everyone could hear. "Thank you for coming personally to supervise tonight's operation." For half a second, no one reacted. The title hung in the air like something people needed time to process. "Director," the general continued. "The joint task force from the FBI and the Department of Defense is in position." I could hear chairs shifting as officers turned to look at one another. Some of them were already realizing what that meant. General Vance finished the sentence calmly. "The authority tonight rests entirely with you." Across the room, Jessica took a step backward. Her eyes were wide now, completely wide, like someone watching reality collapse in real time. "No," she whispered under her breath. Liam didn't say anything at all, because he already understood. His breathing had become shallow. His hand slowly lowered from the table beside him. Then his legs simply gave up. He dropped down onto one knee on the ballroom floor. The movement wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like gravity had suddenly doubled. Robert reacted next. My father took a step backward so quickly that he collided with the edge of a dining table. The plates rattled. A glass tipped over and rolled across the cloth. Robert grabbed the table to steady himself. His face had gone pale. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. Not the daughter he had just threatened 10 minutes earlier. Not the daughter he had dismissed as a failure for most of his life. He looked at me like he had just discovered he had been standing in front of a loaded weapon. Jessica finally found her voice. This is a mistake." Her words came out thin and desperate. "There has to be some misunderstanding." She looked at Liam, then at the general, then back at me. Her brain was searching for a version of reality where she was still the person in control, but there wasn't one. The general stepped slightly to the side, giving me space. Not like a superior officer making room for a subordinate. Like someone acknowledging authority. The entire ballroom understood the gesture. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on me. Officers who outranked Liam, colonels, brigadier generals, men who had spent 30 years in the military. All of them were now watching the woman Jessica had introduced as a janitor. I reached for the glass of water on the bar and took one final sip, slowly, calmly. Then I set the glass down. Jessica's breathing was quick and uneven now. "Sarah," she said. My name sounded different coming from her mouth now. It no longer carried superiority. It carried panic. "You need to explain what's happening." I turned my head slightly and looked directly at her. For years, Jessica had enjoyed humiliating me in public. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, social events. Tonight had simply been the biggest stage she had ever had. And she had used it exactly the same way. Except tonight the story didn't belong to her. I stepped forward one pace. Liam lowered his head. He couldn't even look at me anymore. Jessica's shoulders tightened. Robert stood frozen beside the table, still gripping the edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. My mother sat silently in her chair, her hands covering her mouth. The entire ballroom waited. I met Jessica's eyes. Then I spoke quietly. "Earlier tonight you called me the one who takes out the trash." Jessica didn't answer. Her face had gone completely pale. I looked briefly at Liam kneeling on the floor, then back at her. Jessica had always believed she was better than me. More successful, more admired, more important. She had spent years telling that story. Tonight was simply the moment when the truth decided to interrupt. Jessica once called me the one who cleans up the mess. And tonight, as director, I decided to start cleaning with my own family. I slowly pulled my hand back from General Vance. For a moment, neither of us moved. The ballroom was completely silent. Hundreds of people stood frozen where they were trying to process what they had just witnessed. My sister still looked like someone had unplugged her from reality. Liam remained on one knee, staring at the floor. My father hadn't let go of the table. The entire room was waiting for something. So I gave them something. I lifted my head slightly and looked across the ballroom. Officers, commanders, civilian contractors, politicians, all of them dressed perfectly, all of them pretending a moment ago that this was just another celebration dinner. My eyes moved calmly across the crowd. Then I gave one small nod. That was all the signal anyone needed. The sound came instantly. Bang! The emergency exit doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Then the side doors. Then the service corridor. Boots thundered across the marble floor as tactical teams rushed into the room. Black body armor, federal insignia, CID, and FBI patches on their sleeves. Within seconds, more than a dozen agents had flooded the ballroom. Some moved toward the exits. Others spread through the crowd. No one had to shout. Everyone in the room understood immediately what was happening. Guests backed away from the center of the room, creating a wide, empty circle around Liam and Jessica. The metallic sound of handcuffs clicking open echoed across the marble floor. It's a very distinctive sound. Cold, mechanical, unmistakable. Jessica screamed, "What is this?" Her voice cracked as two agents moved toward Liam. Liam tried to stand. He barely got halfway up before one of the agents forced him down onto the nearest table. Plates slid across the tablecloth. A champagne bottle tipped over and spilled across the white linen. "Major Liam Cross," the agent said, clearly pressing Liam's arm behind his back. "You are under arrest for federal fraud, theft of military property, and conspiracy to distribute restricted equipment." The first cuff snapped shut. The second one followed. Liam didn't fight. He just closed his eyes. Across the room, Jessica rushed forward. "Stop!" she shouted. "You can't do this!" Her voice bounced off the high ballroom ceiling. "Liam hasn't done anything." Two agents stepped in front of her. She tried to push past them. Wine from her broken glass had soaked into the front of her expensive silver dress. Food from the table had smeared across the fabric when Liam was forced down. The glamorous image she had spent all evening presenting had disappeared in less than 30 seconds. Jessica turned toward me. Her voice rose to a shriek. "Sarah, tell them to stop." At that exact moment, the large projection screen behind the stage flickered. The video prepared to celebrate Liam's military career disappeared. Instead, a black background appeared. Then numbers, bank records, transaction lists, wire transfers, account numbers. The entire ballroom watched as line after line of financial evidence filled the screen. Offshore transfers, unauthorized military shipments, payments routed through Blue Harbor Holdings. Next to the transactions appeared digital signatures. Liam Cross, Jessica Cross. One of the officers near the front table leaned closer to read the screen. Another officer cursed under his breath. Jessica turned slowly and looked at the projection behind her. "No," she whispered. The evidence continued scrolling. Medical equipment diverted from military hospitals. Night vision components sold through contractors. Money pulled directly from a veteran's disability support fund. Every transaction, every signature, every account number, displayed 10 feet tall in front of the entire command staff of the base. Jessica's legs buckled slightly. "This isn't real," she said weakly. Meanwhile, Liam was being pulled to his feet by 2 agents. His hands were secured behind his back. The man who had spent the evening preparing to receive a commendation now looked like exactly what he was: a criminal in uniform. Robert finally snapped out of his shock. My father pushed his way through the circle of guests and walked straight toward me. "Sarah," his voice was louder now, desperate, angry. He stopped only a few feet away from where I stood. "Stop this right now." I didn't move. Robert pointed toward the agents dragging Liam away. "You're part of the government," he said quickly. "You have authority here." His voice carried the same tone he had used when I was a child, and he expected obedience. "I'm your father," he jabbed a finger toward Jessica. "That's your sister." Then he delivered the command. "I'm ordering you to stop this and save her." The room went quiet again. Everyone nearby was watching, because Robert clearly believed the word family still meant something powerful. I looked at him calmly, then I reached inside my coat. For half a second, Robert looked relieved. He probably thought I was about to call someone. Instead, I pulled out a folded document. Official government seal, red authorization stamp across the bottom. I opened the paper and held it up where he could see it. Federal arrest warrant. 2 names printed clearly in the center. Major Liam Cross, Jessica Lane Cross. Robert stared at the document. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Behind him, agents were already escorting Liam toward the exit. Jessica had collapsed into a chair, shaking her head repeatedly. "This can't be happening," she kept saying. I lowered the paper slowly. Robert looked back up at me. He had one final weapon left. His voice softened. "Sarah." Now he sounded like a father again. "We're family," he said the word like it was a shield, like it was supposed to stop everything happening in that room. What he didn't understand was something very simple. He thought the word family could protect them. He didn't realize he had burned that word to ashes 15 years ago. The ballroom didn't return to normal after that. It simply broke. Guests who had been standing near the center slowly backed away, like the floor itself had become dangerous. Conversation stopped. No one laughed anymore. The same officers who had been drinking champagne with Liam 20 minutes earlier were now stepping aside to clear a path for the agents escorting him toward the exit. No one wanted to be standing too close. Reputation spreads quickly in a room like this, but scandal spreads faster. Liam walked between 2 federal agents with his hands cuffed behind his back. The same uniform that had looked so impressive earlier now looked like evidence. His medals were still pinned perfectly to his chest, but the shine didn't matter anymore. Because everyone in the room had already seen the screen, the transfers, the stolen equipment, the Cayman account. He kept his head down. He didn't try to defend himself, didn't argue, didn't even look at Jessica. A few feet behind him, Jessica was being held by another pair of agents. She had stopped screaming. Now she just looked lost. Her expensive silver dress was stained with wine and food. Her makeup had started to run. The woman who had walked onto the stage earlier looking like a celebrity now looked like someone who had just watched her life collapse in front of 1,000 witnesses. "Wait," she said weakly as the agents guided her forward. Her voice trembled. "You can't just take us." But no one stopped. The agents moved with calm efficiency. Jessica turned her head toward the tables where the senior officers were seated. "Somebody say something," she pleaded. No one did. Because military careers depend on many things, integrity is one of them. And tonight, the entire command staff had watched the evidence unfold in real time. When Jessica realized no one was coming to defend her, her eyes moved back to me. "Sarah," she said my name like it might still work. Like maybe there was still some part of me she could reach. I didn't answer. The agents continued guiding her toward the door. 10 minutes earlier, she had been standing on a stage talking about building empires. Now she was walking out of the same room in handcuffs. That's how fast illusions collapse. Across the ballroom, my father still hadn't moved. Robert stood frozen near the center of the room, staring at the exit where Liam was being taken. His expression had changed again. Shock had turned into something else now. Calculation. He looked at me again, but this time there was no authority in his eyes, just uncertainty. For the first time in his life, he didn't know how to control the situation. Then my mother stood up. Evelyn had been sitting quietly through most of the chaos, both hands covering her mouth. Now she slowly walked toward me. Her steps were unsteady. I watched her approach. When she reached me, she didn't speak right away. Instead, she grabbed the edge of my sleeve with both hands. The gesture looked small, fragile. "Sarah," she whispered. Her voice shook. "Please." Tears were running down her face now. "No matter what happened, we're still family." The word hung between us. Family. The same word my father had used 5 minutes earlier like a legal defense. Evelyn held onto my sleeve tighter. "Your sister made mistakes," she said quickly, "but prison will destroy her life." Her voice broke. "She's your blood." She looked at me like she expected something. Mercy. Forgiveness. Some kind of emotional collapse. But years change people, and truth changes them even more. I gently removed her hands from my sleeve. The movement was slow, careful, not cruel, just final. She stared at me waiting, so I answered her. Blood doesn't give people permission to betray a country. My voice stayed calm, clear, no anger, just facts. And the word family isn't a credit card you can use whenever you want something. Evelyn's shoulders sagged slightly. She understood. There was nothing left to negotiate. But I wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know," I said. My father looked up again. His attention snapped back to me. "You might want to start looking for a new house." Robert frowned. "What are you talking about?" I held his gaze. "I canceled the mortgage payments tonight." For a second the words didn't register. Then they did. My father's face went pale. "You didn't?" "Yes," I said calmly. "I did." Silence fell again, because that was the final piece of the story. For 4 years, the house they lived in had been paid for by someone they considered the failure of the family. And now that payment was gone. Robert opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at the floor. There was nothing he could threaten anymore. No will, no inheritance, no authority, just consequences. Across the ballroom, the agents were already leading Liam and Jessica out through the large oak doors. The same doors where Jessica had stopped me earlier that night. Where she had told the usher I was just a janitor who had wandered in looking for cleaning supplies. I glanced once more around the room. Officers were already returning to quiet conversations. The band members stood awkwardly beside their instruments. The evening would eventually continue. Military events always do. General Vance stepped beside me. "Director," he said quietly. "The vehicles are ready." I nodded once. Then I turned towards the exit. The same doors Jessica had tried to keep me outside of. This time, no one blocked the way. General Vance walked beside me as we crossed the ballroom. Behind us, my parents remained standing exactly where they were, surrounded by the ruins of the life they had built on lies. I didn't look back. Some lines in life can be repaired. Others can't. Tonight, I walked out of those oak doors and left that family behind forever. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have protected your family? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me what you think in the comments and subscribe. If you want to hear more stories about justice, loyalty, and the moments that define who we really are. The ballroom doors closed behind me that night, and for the first time in hours, everything went quiet. No music, no applause, no speeches. Just the sound of my own footsteps echoing down the long hallway outside the gala. People think moments like that feel like victory. They imagine some dramatic rush of satisfaction when justice finally lands. The truth is quieter than that. Walking away from that room didn't feel like winning. It felt like closing a chapter of my life that I had spent years pretending didn't exist. Because the hardest part of that night wasn't watching Liam get arrested. And it wasn't seeing my sister dragged out of the room in handcuffs. The hardest part was realizing something I had avoided admitting for a long time. Some families teach loyalty, and some families teach silence. There's a big difference between those two things. Growing up, I heard the same sentence over and over again. Family always comes first. It sounds like a good rule, strong, moral, almost noble. But the older I got, the more I realized that sentence can be used in two very different ways. The first way is healthy. It means supporting each other, helping each other stand back up when life knocks someone down, protecting the people you love when the world treats them unfairly. That kind of loyalty builds strong families. But the second version of that sentence is something else entirely. It means hiding mistakes, ignoring bad behavior, pretending nothing is wrong because confronting the truth might make someone uncomfortable. That version doesn't build families. It protects damage. And that's exactly what my family had been doing for years. My sister wasn't suddenly a dishonest person the night she got arrested. Those habits didn't appear out of nowhere. They grew slowly, little shortcuts, small lies, tiny moments where someone decided that the rules didn't apply to them. And every time someone stayed quiet about it, the behavior grew stronger. Silence is fertilizer for bad decisions. The truth is, corruption rarely starts big. It starts small. One exception, one favor, one rationalization, then another, and another, until suddenly the person standing in front of you isn't the person you thought they were. That's why I want to say something directly to anyone watching this story. If you've ever been in a situation where a family member asked you to stay quiet about something wrong, you know how complicated that moment feels. It's uncomfortable, because the word family carries emotional weight. People use it like a shield. They say things like, "You wouldn't turn on your own family," or "blood should come before everything else." But here's the reality that a lot of people don't want to say out loud. Family is not a license to break the law, and it's definitely not a license to hurt other people. When my sister and Liam stole money meant for wounded veterans, they didn't just betray the military. They betrayed every soldier who depended on that support. They betrayed the people who trusted them. And when someone crosses a line like that, pretending it didn't happen doesn't protect the family. It destroys it. Real loyalty isn't about protecting someone from consequences. Real loyalty means refusing to let someone become the worst version of themselves. Sometimes that means helping them. Sometimes that means confronting them. And sometimes it means stepping out of the way and letting justice do its job. That's the part people rarely talk about. Accountability is not cruelty, it's responsibility. And responsibility doesn't disappear just because someone shares your last name. I also want to be honest about something else. Standing in that ballroom watching my own sister fall apart wasn't easy. People imagine moments like that are fueled by anger. But anger fades quickly. What stays behind is clarity. And clarity forces you to accept something difficult. Sometimes the people we hope will change won't. Sometimes the people we try to help for years will continue making the same destructive choices. And at some point you have to stop trying to carry them. You have to let them face the consequences of the life they chose. That's not abandonment. That's reality. One of the biggest mistakes people make in life is confusing love with permission. Loving someone doesn't mean approving everything they do. And refusing to protect someone's bad decisions doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you finally started respecting yourself. Because integrity has a price. Sometimes that price is comfort. Sometimes that price is relationships. And sometimes that price is the illusion that everything in your life is fine. But integrity also gives you something in return. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you didn't compromise your values to make someone else comfortable. So if you ever find yourself in a moment where someone tries to use the word family to pressure you into doing something wrong, remember this. Loyalty should never require you to betray your principles. And if someone demands that kind of loyalty from you, what they're asking for isn't family. It's silence. And silence is how problems grow until they become disasters. If there's one thing that night taught me, it's this. Truth eventually finds its way into the room. The only question is whether you're standing on the right side when it arrives. One detail from that night keeps replaying in my head more than anything else. It wasn't the arrests, it wasn't the speech, and it wasn't even the moment the general stood in front of me. It was a single sentence my sister said at the entrance. "She's just a janitor," Jessica said it casually, confidently, like it was an obvious fact that didn't need discussion. And honestly, that sentence tells you everything about how a lot of people move through life. They decide who matters in a room within the first 5 seconds. They look at someone's clothes, their job title, their car, their social media, then they assign value. Important. Not important. Worth listening to. Easy to ignore. Jessica had always been good at that game. She knew how to impress the right people, how to dress for the right events, how to surround herself with the right kind of attention. And for most of her life, that strategy worked. Because the truth is, people do underestimate others all the time. They assume the quiet person in the room has nothing to say. They assume the person who doesn't brag has nothing to show. They assume the one standing in the corner doesn't understand what's happening. But here's the part most people never think about. Being underestimated can be a very powerful position. When someone thinks you don't matter, they stop being careful around you. They talk more freely. They show off. They make mistakes. And that's exactly what happened that night. Liam wore an $80,000 watch to a military gala, not because he needed it, but because he wanted people to notice. Jessica bought a $15,000 dress using stolen money, not because she needed it, but because she wanted people to admire it. That kind of behavior comes from the same mindset. They believed they were untouchable. They believed everyone around them was either impressed or irrelevant. And the moment someone believes that, they stop protecting themselves. Pride makes people careless. Now here's something important. A lot of people who feel overlooked in life start reacting emotionally. They try to prove themselves immediately. They argue. They correct people. They try to force respect. I understand that impulse, but it usually backfires. Because reacting in the moment rarely changes someone's opinion. It only creates more noise. What actually changes perception is patience. That night when Jessica insulted me at the entrance, I could have responded. I could have told the usher exactly who I was. I could have embarrassed her right there. But that wouldn't have accomplished anything meaningful. It would have turned the night into a family argument. Instead, I waited. Because sometimes the strongest move you can make is simply allowing people to continue underestimating you. While they're doing that, you're observing, you're learning, you're collecting the truth they're too distracted to hide. There's another reason patience matters. Emotion clouds judgment. Anger makes people sloppy, but patience gives you perspective. When you step back and watch carefully, you start seeing patterns other people miss. You notice the details. The watch that doesn't match the salary. The bank transfer that doesn't match the story. The behavior that doesn't match the reputation. That kind of awareness is powerful, but it requires restraint. And restraint is something most people struggle with in a world that rewards quick reactions. Social media encourages instant responses. Arguments escalate in seconds. Everyone feels pressure to speak immediately, but real control comes from choosing when to act. That's something I want anyone listening to understand. Being underestimated is not a weakness. Sometimes it's the best strategic position you can have. When people ignore you, they reveal themselves. They show you who they really are. And that information is far more valuable than winning a quick argument. Now I also want to make one thing clear. What happened that night wasn't about revenge. Revenge is emotional. It's driven by anger and personal satisfaction. Justice is different. Justice is quiet. It's methodical. And it exists to protect people who might never even know your name. When Liam and Jessica were arrested, it wasn't because I wanted to humiliate them. It was because stolen military equipment and veterans' funds were being moved through a criminal network. That kind of corruption hurts real people. Soldiers in hospitals, families relying on support programs, communities that trust the system to function properly. Stopping that wasn't personal, it was necessary. And that's another lesson worth remembering. If your motivation is revenge, your decisions will be emotional. But if your motivation is justice, your decisions become clear. Clarity removes doubt. It removes hesitation, and it allows you to act without being controlled by anger. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where someone dismisses you, mocks you, or assumes you're not worth paying attention to, remember something. You don't have to prove them wrong immediately. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stay quiet. Observe, learn, and wait for the moment when the truth speaks louder than anything you could have said. Because in the end, respect earned through actions lasts a lot longer than respect demanded through words. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone decided to ignore. Before we end this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought you didn't matter? And if that moment ever came where the truth finally showed itself, what did you do? Did you walk away? Or did you let your actions answer for you? Tell me what you think.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction, but the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.